We'll get the work started here. Okay, so today we're joined by Ben Castleman from University of Virginia and Lindsay Page from University of Pittsburgh. And I'm going to turn this over as quickly as possible to them, but I wanted to let you know once again, you're listening to a webinar on summer melt that's being conducted for the Lumina Community Partnership for Attainment. We are really glad to have very, very large attendance today, as well as a bunch of people who have asked for the webinar recording. We'll be posting this online as well as sending it out to you directly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay and Ben and ask that if you've got any questions, please write them in the Q&A or chat boxes, and I will facilitate those Q&As after Ben and Lindsay wrap up. So over to you guys.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Haley, and we're really appreciative of the opportunity to be on the webinar, and to all the people who have joined, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day. We are going to be presenting, I think over the next 20 or 30 minutes, hopefully max, our research on summer melt. Our goal is to hopefully prompt some interesting back and forth dialogue, and you'll see at the end of our presentation we include both of our contact information. We'd also be happy to follow up with anyone offline after the webinar. I do want to acknowledge the very generous financial support we've received from a variety of philanthropic funders that have made this work possible. And I also want to acknowledge that the Lumina Foundation has very generously funded work that builds on the foundation of our summer melt work. So thank you for that. Certainly if there are any errors in our presentation, they are ours and not the funders. If you could go to the next slide, please. So summer melt is a term that has been around for some time, at least 10 or 15 years or so, but it's a term that has traditionally lived in the world of higher education admissions, and it has typically referred to the tendency of students who have paid a deposit at one college or university to instead matriculate at a different institution, usually presumed to be of peer quality. So you could think about a student who deposits to enroll at the great University of Virginia and for some inexplicable reason decides instead to matriculate at Wake Forest or Duke. Next. In our work, we use summer melt to refer to a very different phenomenon. So throughout our presentation, throughout our work, we refer to summer melt as the tendency of students who have done everything they are supposed to in college. They've worked hard academically to get accepted to college in the first place. In most cases, they've applied for financial aid. They've even chosen where to go as of the end of high school, but failed to matriculate anywhere. And summer melt, as you'll see, is something that disproportionately affects low-income and first-generation students. Next slide. Now, as you can see here, summer melt is something that occurs at surprisingly high rates and in all different parts of the country. Each of the percentages that we provide here draw on our own research or on research that our colleagues have conducted in districts across the country. And the percentages that you see are the share of students who, again, have been accepted to college, in almost all cases have applied for financial aid and have chosen where to go as of high school graduation. So you can see in Boston, Massachusetts, 1 out of every 5 students who meet those criteria fails to matriculate in college. It's about a similar rate in Fulton County, Georgia. In Philadelphia, Dallas, Albuquerque, upwards of 1 out of every 3 students who's taken actions and has clear intentions to go to college fails to matriculate. And in Fort Worth, Texas, it's almost 1 out of every 2 students. What this chart also masks is the substantial variation by socioeconomic status and the probability of melting. So in Fulton County, Georgia, for instance, if you look among students who do not qualify for a free reduced lunch, so, lower middle income or above, only 1 in 10 of those students fails to matriculate in the fall if they've been accepted and they plan to enroll. If, however, you look among the students qualifying for free reduced lunch, it's more than 3 times as high. About 1/3 of those students fail to matriculate. Next slide, please. So, of course, when we see a chart like that, I know certainly I speak for Lindsay in saying that seeing these melt rates across the country continues to be a source of surprise and also dismay. Over the years, it's led us to ask, why are students melting, especially students who've already come so far on the college pipeline. And what we have found in our work is that even after being accepted to college and choosing where to attend, students face a variety of hurdles to enrollment. So many of those are financial in nature. Students, even if they've applied for financial aid, we find that a surprisingly high share of low-income students are required to verify the income and asset information that they've provided on the FAFSA in order to actually receive their financial aid packages. And the verification can be a very daunting process. We recently wrote a book about our summer melt work, and I'm just going to share a short excerpt about a student just to illustrate how financial aid verification problems can arise and then lead to some of the summer melt barriers that we see down the road. This is a student named Tiana, who we learned about. Tiana's lived in foster care since she was 13. Throughout high school, she worked several jobs a year, usually 2 at a time, just to support herself. When it came time to apply for financial aid, Tiana was able to apply as an independent filer, meaning she did not have to submit parental income information. In order to verify her status as an independent when she completed her FAFSA, she was required to submit her own W-2 as well as formal documentation of her foster status. She submitted this paperwork but was nonetheless flagged for income verification by the Department of Education. At first, she thought it meant she made a mistake on the FAFSA. She then discovered that she was required to file her taxes before she could finalize the FAFSA but didn't know how or where to go for help. Her aunt finally agreed to take Tiana to the location where she filed her taxes, but only if Tiana agreed to give her a portion of her refund. Now, while the federal government flags students for verification, students have to complete the verification process directly with their set of prospective colleges. Tiana, therefore, had to complete separate verification documents for each of the colleges to which she had been accepted. Several of the schools sent her additional forms with which to verify her status as an independent. Though Tiana's first choice institution required that she complete multiple verification forms, the financial aid office's policy was to send her only one form at a time. Only after she completed and sent back each form would they then send her the next one. Now, you can imagine, faced with that kind of process, a lot of students' response would be to feel overwhelmed, to put it off, and that's exactly what Tiana did for quite some time. She was fortunate in that she lived in one of the communities across the country at the time where there are extensive summer supports available to students. So she was able to connect to an advisor, work through verification, and successfully enroll in college. But we know there are many other communities across the country still where students who are equally hardworking and tenacious like Tiana run into a barrier like this, don't have anywhere to turn, and have trouble moving forward. So in addition to verification, students face a slew of other financial hurdles over the summer, reviewing their award letters, evaluating supplementary loan applications, encountering unanticipated fees like orientation and housing. Next, please. And then there are a series of procedural hurdles that students have to overcome. They need to register for orientation and placement tests, complete housing applications, review health insurance options, waive their health insurance if they can stay on their family's plans. Next. So all of these challenges arise at a time when students typically have little access to professional help. They're no longer part of their high school, and high school counselors typically work on 9 or 10-month contracts, so they're often not in the office. Students have yet to engage with supports available at their college, and if they're the first in their family to go to college, they may not know where to turn to for help. Next, please. Over the last several years, we've developed a series of interventions to provide students with additional assistance during the summer months. So I'll give you a high-level overview and then talk about one of them in a little more detail. In our original work, this goes back to a small pilot study that I and my colleague Karen Arnold from Boston College conducted in Providence, Rhode Island. We hired high school counselors or community-based financial aid advisors to work during those summer months and to reach out to students to offer help with financial aid forms, with these procedural tasks, and dealing with the social emotional hurdles to enrollment. This is not an intensive bridge program that we've provided. Typically, counselors are reaching out and offering 2 to 3 hours of targeted assistance to students. Next. In separate work, we've also explored having peers reach out to students on the theory that recent high school graduates may be particularly responsive to students like them who graduated from the same communities, are now succeeding in college, and went through a lot of the same hurdles. Our hope was that the peer mentors would be able to offer advice, firsthand perspective and encouragement, and when necessary, connect students to additional professional supports. Next. We've also had, in one location in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we facilitated a partnership between the Albuquerque Public Schools and the University of New Mexico, where most college-attending students in the district plan to go, so that we could investigate whether students might be more responsive to outreach coming from the college side, the institution where they are indicating a desire to be, rather than the high school side, where they have relationships, but maybe students have kind of moved on, at least in thinking about who they're going to engage with. Next. And finally, and what I'll talk a little bit more in detail in the next couple slides, we spent the last couple years in particular developing an automated but highly personalized text messaging campaign where we can provide students with personalized reminders about the tasks they have to complete over the summer. Next. I think across all of these interventions, the common themes are that we are helping students navigate complex processes. We're trying to provide them with simplified information about the task that they need to complete, and we are facilitating access to professional support when students need that. So we're going to talk about using these strategies, particularly in the context of summer melt, but as Lindsay will speak to at the end, we're also now increasingly looking at how we can apply these same themes earlier and later in students' college trajectories. Next slide. So as I mentioned a moment ago, a lot of our work over the last couple of years is exploring how we can use personalized text messaging to provide students with both personalized and simplified information, and also to connect them to assistance. Our appeal in thinking about text messaging is it's the predominant means by which young people communicate at this point. Based on Pew data, 65 to 70% of young people text with each other on a daily basis. That compares to about 3% that email. And when I say that we did a texting campaign, this is not us sending messages every day to students. It's not even 3 times a week. We sent 10 messages over the course of the summer. You can see we texted students with information about their FAFSA and their financial aid award letters, about completing orientation, placement tests, and housing applications, and encouraging them to seek help with their tuition bill. Next. Here you can see examples of the text messages that we've sent. On the left is an example of about half of the messages that we sent, where we were reminding students about very discrete tasks. So you can see this is specific to the student. Hi, Alex, have you signed up for the UMass Boston orientation? Specific to where she planned to go to college. The last one's July 15th. If you need to register, here's a link that will bring you right to the orientation registration page for UMass Boston, so you can do it in the moment from your mobile phone. And if you need help, reply to talk with an advisor. So about half of the messages were these kinds of discrete tasks. The other half were what you see on the right. We didn't think it was likely or even feasible that a student could complete the FAFSA or would complete the FAFSA from their mobile phone, at least not right now. But what we could do is encourage the student to seek out help. So we say, hi, Alex, need help with the FAFSA. If you've got questions about your aid award letter, or if you need more aid, reply to meet with a counselor. One thing I should point out is that this is not to me or Lindsay or research assistants tapping out messages on our iPhones to individual students. At this point, we're doing summer meld and other texting campaigns with thousands of students at a time. And so in order to do that, we need some basic information that we collect from students, like their name, their cell phone number, where they plan to go to college. We can pretty quickly assemble a lot of college-specific information just from websites. Just about every college has an admitted student's website. So we can gather really specific information about tasks that have to be completed, the date by when they need to do so. And then we've worked with a really great texting platform called Signalvine to both send out those messages that in an automated fashion, but that, as you can see, are highly personalized, and also make it really easy for students to request additional assistance. So next slide. What I want to show you here in the final slide before turning it over to Lindsay is the kinds of interactions that we can facilitate through text messaging. We're aware that there are probably a lot of school counselors who, on the one hand, like the idea of texting students, on the other hand, may not want to use their mobile phones or provide students with their mobile numbers, may not feel comfortable having a lot of back and forth on their own phones with students. And so working with Signalvine, we've developed an online platform that looks just like web-based email. So a counselor logs on. Instead of going to gmail.com, they go to signalvine.com. They see an inbox, and anytime a student writes back, it goes into the inbox. The counselor can read it, respond to the student's message, and have a pretty in-depth back-and-forth dialogue. And this slide just gives you an example. So the gray message is an automated message that went out reminding students about their tuition bill being due and asking if they have a plan for paying it. The student writes back and says, okay, I saw what my bill is, so is that what financial aid takes care of? Next. Now, the advisor has had some interaction with this student before, and so asks, do you know how much your bill's for? The student responds, I think it's about $3,000. Next. The advisor knows that given where the student plans to go to college, given their financial circumstances, that sounds too high. So the advisor writes back, sounds like your financial aid hasn't been applied yet. Did you check your email? See if you had any emails from the aid office. The student does that, says, I figured it out. They need my transcript. Next. And so the advisor can write back and say, great, that makes sense. Once they received it, you should be all set. If not, check your email often and let us know. And so in some ways, the irony of what this texting is doing is directing students to the communication that they already had received. In this case, this student, to communication they had already received from their college. But it's leveraging a channel that the students are engaging with every day. And we think about these texts like behavioral multivitamins, where we can leverage a variety of different strategies to encourage students to make more active, to engage more actively and in an informed way with the college process. We're simplifying information with them, we're prompting them to deal with a task in the moment rather than put it off, and we're making it really easy for them to get help when they need it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lindsay so you can learn some of what we have found through this kind of campaign.
Thanks, Ben. So in this next slide, what we wanted to do is just continue to give a little bit of a sense of the variation in the responses that we received from students, or that students responded to the text messages that were sent out. So in the first message, and the response was really of interest to us in particular because text messaging remains a mode of communication that is not standard in educational settings. So as we've talked with counselors and nonprofit organizations that work directly with students, some of them are engaged in text messaging, whereas many of them are not yet. And the text messaging campaigns that we implemented were in part inspired by the fact that when in those early counselor interventions, when counselors tried telephone and email, it was hard to get in touch with students, but once text messaging was introduced, students were much more responsive. So in this slide, and these are verbatim responses. Maybe we fixed the capitalization, but otherwise they come directly from the students. So in the first response, some students were just grateful for the outreach, for the attention from their counselors. Some students expressed surprise that their counselors were reaching out to them via text, but also appreciative of the outreach. Excuse me. In the second response, who's this? What we take away from that is that for organizations that are interested in implementing text message type strategies, introducing text messaging as a mode of communication with the students whom you serve, it's important to really tee it up for the students, to let them know that you are going to be using text messaging, to let them know that they should anticipate that outreach so that they're not confused by it, because typically it's not a mode of communication that students might be expecting from the formal institutions with whom they interact. And then the third example here marked July 8th, again verbatim from a student that came in via text message, and I will take the time to read it. Oh, hey, you couldn't text me at a better time. I was wondering if I can make an appointment with you. I need to update my financial aid with the 2011 tax forms, and I don't know how to do it. I need your help. And so what we saw here is that text messaging really is a way for students to be able to interact with the supportive adults in their lives. And by prompting students to ask that question, we're paving the way for them to get the help and support that they need. Finally, it was in sort of understanding the impact of the text messaging as a strategy, it was important for us to understand the extent to which students might have felt annoyed by the text messages, that they didn't want the messages. And across the many different text message campaigns that we've implemented now, we find that there are very, very low rates of opt-out from the students who are targeted for the messaging. So typically under 5%, about 4% of students, and where we've also messaged parents, students and parents actually opt out from the messaging. And so our take on that is that students are either at least neutral and at best positive about receiving outreach and reminders via text message. So as we get into the next slide, thank you. As we get into the next slide, in the next several slides, what I want to do is share some of our impact results with you across the several interventions that we have implemented. And one thing that I do want to take the time to talk about before we get into the specific results is the point that one thing that we have been really gratified by, and it's been an important feature of our work, is that we've implemented every summer melt intervention that we have investigated in the context of a randomized trial. So we have done these randomized trials together with nonprofit organizations such as You Aspire and with several school districts around the country. And we really want to express our gratitude to those organizations, because for organizations that are really student-centered and student-focused, the idea of conducting a randomized trial and perhaps withholding supports from some group of students can be a really hard thing to wrap one's mind around. And so in all of our interventions, when we randomized students to treatment or to control, what that meant was that students who were assigned to the treatment group were receiving proactive outreach throughout the summer. Either, now I'm going to switch back to look across some of the different interventions that we implemented. So I'm not just talking about text message outreach. In this slide, we're looking at counselor outreach. So again, across the interventions that we implemented, students assigned to our treatment groups were getting proactive outreach throughout the summer, and then active counselor or advisor support if they took up that opportunity. For students in the control group, all students were encouraged at the beginning of the summer that help was there for them if they needed it, that if they had a question over the summer, they could come into the school, they could come into the nonprofit organization, they could pick up the phone, they could reach out to engage and help and support. And so what's important and what helped our partnering organizations feel better about the idea of doing this randomized trial was the key principle that if a student ever raised his or her hand and said, yes, I have a question, there's something I need help with, that student was never denied support. A really key learning for us, though, and it's not illustrated on the slide, but a really key learning for us is that even when students were heartily encouraged at the beginning of the summer that help was available for them, virtually no student came in to receive support. And so again, a key takeaway for us is that particularly during this period of time when students aren't engaged in an institution like their high school or like their college community on a daily basis, it's not sufficient to remind the student that help is there, but that we really need to be more proactive in reaching out to our students. I'll say in contrast to that, that figure of 2%, virtually no student in the control group taking up support over the summer. In the slide that we're looking at here, for students in the treatment group, about 75% of those students interacted with a counselor, either over the phone, something robust, via text message, via an electronic communication, or in person over the summer. So we observed a really substantial difference in the extent to which students were able to connect with help and support during this period of time. So finally, I'll get to what we see in the slide. Oh, if you can actually go back. Yep, I still want to talk about this slide a little bit. So in this slide, we're looking at the impacts of the counselor-based outreach, and we show three different sets of results. So the first set of results looks at the impact of counselor outreach over the summertime on timely college enrollment. So the blue bar represents those students who were in our treatment group, those students getting proactive outreach, whereas the orange bar represents those students who did not get proactive outreach. And so here what we see is about a 5 percentage point impact on timely enrollment for students who received the active outreach over the summer. Now, in looking at the next two bars, one thing that was really important for us, we would worry if what we were doing through this intervention was improving timely enrollment, only to see students drop out after a semester or two. if that's what we were doing, then arguably summer melt interventions would be a bad thing if we were essentially pushing students into college who were not ready to succeed in college. But what we see is something different. If we look at first-year persistence, so this is students persisting through their freshman year of college, and then second-year persistence, what was important for us to see is the maintenance of the differential height of those bars, so that the blue bar is taller than the orange bar in all cases, means that the intervention is helping students not only to enroll at higher rates, but also to maintain that effective treatment over time, that students are both enrolling and persisting at higher rates because of that summer outreach. Now, one thing that's important to note is that after that first summer of support between high school graduation and college enrollment, the organizations were no longer actively working to support these students. Nevertheless, we see the treatment effects persist over time. And so what that says to us is that the summer support, the summer outreach and help may be helping students not only start college, but also get a better and more successful start to college. So students are able to hopefully be more attuned to some of these logistical and financial tasks that they need to handle once they get to their college campus. The last thing that I want to say on this slide, and while it's not represented in the picture, but just in the little text box on the side, when we disaggregated these impacts by measures of socioeconomic status, what we found was that impacts were in fact largest for the lowest income students in our sample. So these were students who either in their school district qualified for free and reduced price lunch, or students who had an EFC of 0 based on their FAFSA filing. So in the next slide, we show impacts for our text message intervention in particular. And here we're showing results across a variety of different geographic settings. So the first two bars show the impact of the text message outreach on timely college enrollment in Springfield and Lawrence, Massachusetts. So these are very low-income communities in Massachusetts. The second set of bars shows results for a similar text message intervention that we conducted with the Dallas Independent School District. And the third set of bars shows results for a text message intervention that we implemented in Austin, Texas. And what we find in the two different Texas school districts in particular is that the text message outreach was particularly beneficial, very similar to our result from the prior slide. Our text message intervention was particularly beneficial for the lowest income students in those communities, so the students in the school districts who qualify for free and reduced price lunch. Now, while we don't represent it on the slide, we also implemented a similar intervention in the Boston area, and in the Boston area, we found that the text message intervention did not have a positive impact. But we really contrast the Boston area to the localities that are represented on this slide. In Boston, students who graduate from the Boston Public Schools or students in the Boston area really have the opportunity to gain access to a wealth of college-going supports, not only during high school, but also in the summer after high school, whereas in these communities, the level of support is much lower. And so we think that these kinds of strategies can be particularly beneficial in communities that have fewer college-going supports. But what is encouraging to us is that we really see positive impacts across a variety of settings. So finally, on the next slide, we wanted to share results from the intervention that we had implemented, as Ben had mentioned before, with the Albuquerque Public Schools. And as Ben had noted, what we did in Albuquerque was facilitate a collaboration between the Albuquerque Public Schools and the University of New Mexico. Now, what's very interesting about the Albuquerque context is compared to other school districts, urban school districts around the country, where the majority of college graduate or high school graduates go on to probably one of about 10, maybe even 15 post-secondary institutions. In Albuquerque, the vast majority of students go on to one of 2 post-secondary institutions. And for students who are continuing on to 4-year institutions, it's even more dramatic, the share of students who go on to the state flagship, the University of New Mexico. And so this was a partnership that we facilitated between the University of New Mexico and the Albuquerque Public Schools, where high school counselors from the Albuquerque Public Schools would be providing outreach to students, either framing their outreach as coming from the high school, or framing their outreach as coming from the university. And when the outreach, for the counselors who were providing outreach from the university, those counselors were also receiving additional training and support from the university on the specific transition tasks that students needed to be taken care of over the summer months. In contrast to our prior summer melt interventions that really focused on a broad swath of students, in Albuquerque, because these were students who had been admitted already to the University of New Mexico, we were focused on students who were comparatively higher achieving or higher performing based on their prior measures of academic success, and given that they had been admitted to their state flagship institution. And so in the results that we show here, we single out a particular group of students for whom we observed a high rate of summer melt, and for whom the summer outreach was particularly beneficial. So if you look at the two different sets of bars in the slide, we illustrate results for Hispanic males on the left, and then for all other students on the right. And we combine all other students together, not because there aren't important differences among students in that category, but just because for non-Hispanic males and for all female students, we observed very high rates of timely enrollment in college after high school graduation. So among those students, 94% of students were matriculating on time. We contrast that to the on-time matriculation rate for Hispanic males. So in the slide, I'm comparing the two green bars. So for Hispanic males who also had been admitted to the University of New Mexico, we observed that only 84% of those students, absent the intervention, were matriculating to college on time. And what we see then is that with the blue bars in particular, the blue bars represent outreach from the University of New Mexico. What we observe here is that when outreach is coming to these students from the university context, that has a particularly strong impact on improving timely enrollment for students. And so one thing that we think about here or hypothesize here is that when we look at the demographics of the University of New Mexico, Hispanic males are underrepresented relative to the share of Hispanic males in the Albuquerque public schools. And so there's a lot of literature more in the social psychology domain that investigates questions of social belonging in post-secondary contexts as well as in other contexts of learning. And so here we really hypothesize that outreach from the post-secondary community may particularly help Hispanic males feel that sense of belonging and feel that sense of being welcomed into their post-secondary community, as well as providing them the help and support that they need with their college transition tasks. So if we go on to the next slide, this is a picture of the jacket cover of our book on summer melt that we're so excited was recently released from the Harvard Ed Press. And you know, one thing that I'll say, as Ben and I dove into this work, we really started this work with a very quantitative frame in mind, that we did descriptive work, Ben conducted a randomized trial, and then we built on that to conduct a set of other randomized trials and spent a lot of time with the data. Now, in writing the book, we really had the opportunity to do much more qualitative work, to really capture the voices of counselors and advisors, other supporting adults, and the students whom they support, to really understand the challenges that students face in this transition. And I'll say, at least for myself, and I'm sure I speak for Ben too, that it was in doing this qualitative work that we really came to understand what was going on with students in this summer and what were the challenges that they were facing. I'm not going to read directly from the book, but I do want to share one student's experience. And now that I'm at the University of Pittsburgh, this is a Pennsylvania story, so I want to share this story in particular. So this was a student who attended a school in the Philadelphia area, and early in her high school experience, she became informally estranged from her parents. Her parents decided that they wanted to move out of state but she decided that she wanted to stay in state so that she could, and in the same area so that she could continue to attend the same high school. And so during her high school experience, this was a student who couch hopped. She lived with extended relatives in the area. She stayed with friends so that she could have consistency in her high school experience. And she did well in high school. She was a strong student and ended up applying and being admitted to Penn State main campus, so the state flagship in Pennsylvania. It's a very strong post-secondary institution. But remember, her parents had moved out of state. And when this student received her tuition bill in the spring, or her financial aid package in the spring, what she saw was that Penn State was counting her as an out-of-state student because her parents lived out of state, and that information was reflected in her financial aid information. And so this is, in a way, in many ways, it's a happy story. So this was a huge challenge for the student. She didn't know what she was going to do, but luckily she did attend a school where help over the summer was available. And so she was able to work with an advisor from her school to communicate with Penn State properly, to get Penn State to reclassify her as an in-state student so that her tuition bill would be much more manageable. So like other state flagship institutions, out-of-state students pay about double what in-state students do. But in talking with the advisor who supported her through this process, it was clear that there were many, many hoops to jump through in order for her to be reclassified properly. And as I said, it's a happy outcome because she was able to get that support and was able to go on to be a successful student at Penn State. But we hypothesized that without that support, the outcome would not have been so positive. So we share with you this book where we summarize a lot of our quantitative research, but really build out the problem of summer melt and the challenge of summer melt by sharing the experiences like this student and the supporting adults around them who have helped them with these summer challenges. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm just going to wrap up by saying that, as Ben had highlighted before, in our own work, what we're really interested to do now is to take what we've learned from our research on summer melt and really ask the question of whether some of these principles of proactive outreach, simplifying information for students, and connecting students more seamlessly to support, if we're able to improve college-going outcomes for students at other places in the college-going pipeline. So I'm not going to read all of the details on this slide for you, but just to highlight some examples. Looking earlier, we're really investigating whether we can use strategies of outreach, particularly around text messaging, to get students to support students in engaging in a more robust process of college search and application. Some of the challenges that students face when they get to the summer after high school arise because they haven't, for example, applied to colleges that make good financial sense for them. And so a question here is, well, if we can use these kinds of proactive strategies to connect students to better information during college search and application, maybe we can mitigate some of those challenges that they might otherwise face down the road. Similarly, there's lots of push nationally around FAFSA filing for students. One thing that we observe is that even when students file the FAFSA, they often don't file the FAFSA in time to meet institutional priority deadlines or state priority deadlines. And so can we use strategies like text messaging to give students better information about those deadlines and timeframes with which they should be completing those tasks? And then similarly, once students are enrolled in college, we know that we as a nation have a long way to go to improve college persistence and success outcomes for students. And so we're interested in using similar strategies to help students with the tasks and processes that they need to navigate in order to continue to be successful. For example, together with U Aspire, we implemented an intervention where we sent students text message reminders about FAFSA renewal. And particularly for community college students, we found that this had a resoundingly positive impact on persistence from the freshman year into the sophomore year of college. And so we have begun to generate some strong evidence, we think, that these strategies can be beneficial at other points in the timeline, but that's really where we're building with our own research. Finally, on the last slide, if you just want to go forward, I think on this slide we just provide our contact information, both our email addresses, our Twitter handles, and as Ben said before, and just the last thing that I want to note before we open it up for more of a discussion, we're very glad to hear from all of the folks who are participating now in the call or who might listen to the recording later. We're very glad to hear from you on how you might see this work connecting to your work with students and where we might be able to be helpful to you in your own work or find opportunities for collaboration. So with that, I just want to say thanks again, and I'll turn it back over to Haley, who can lead us in a conversation.
Excellent. Thank you guys very much. I'm going to minimize my sheet here and then reopen. I'm actually going to stop sharing for just a moment so I can get all of my controls here. All right. So here we have some questions. Okay. All right. So maybe you can answer a question that I had when I was listening to you as I go through some of these things with the Q&A here. What type of training did the counselors need to do this? Was it intensive? Was it, sort of rote? What kind of intervention did they need?
So I think it varies depending on the organization. I think if there are school districts on the line, as you probably know or experience, your counselors have lots of skills and experience at helping students with some of the social emotional barriers that may arise over the summer, and they may have had quite a bit of experience helping students through the college search and application process. We found in our own work, I know this varies a lot from district to district, and I think it's changing pretty rapidly over time, but we found that oftentimes counselors had less opportunity, had received less training on helping students with some of the financial aid challenges that arise over the summer. So whether it's submitting the FAFSA initially, dealing with verification, evaluating loan options. And so in each of the sites where we've done summer melt interventions, we've certainly tried to supplement the kind of great skill set that counselors bring to bear already with additional guidance around financial aid training. Lindsay mentioned You Aspire as one organization with whom we've worked to actually implement these interventions. They do tremendous work on financial aid advising, and I think are nationally recognized for it. They've recently developed a technical training and assistance arm. So if districts or other organizations are interested in boosting capacity to do financial aid advising, You Aspire would be great to contact. I think that holds for the counselor outreach work. For the peer mentor work, I think on the one hand we found that peer mentors were really great at connecting with students, but that also required quite a bit of management and support given the complexity of challenges that students faced. So Urban Assembly in New York is an organization that has really well-developed training protocols for peer mentors. And then on the texting work, the training is actually fairly simple. As I mentioned earlier, the two-way interface that we've developed with Signalvine works just like web-based email. And so any counselor who's familiar with logging on to Gmail pretty quickly, I think, adapts to checking signalvine.com or another vendor site to see when students have written back. So the technological side of it is fairly straightforward. We will also work closely with sites on the kind of design of the outreach, and actually with generous funding from the Gates Foundation, Great Lakes Foundation, we're actually now working on a kind of scale-up version of our text messaging work so that we could, I don't know that it will ever be quite off the shelf, but we're trying to develop materials, procedures so that organizations anywhere could implement the texting as independently as possible.
Right, and can you spell the name of that platform?
Sure, it's SIGNAL V-I-N-E. So the word signal, like send a signal, and then the word vine, like grapevine.com.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It was a little quick. Excellent. And so we did have a question. How do students or parents opt out of the text message? And by that I mean, I think you're implying that it's an automatic enrollment with an optional sign out. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing that we should, if we can back up from that question a little bit, right now I won't say most, but for school districts in particular, it's not necessarily a given that school districts or even other student-serving organizations will have cell phone numbers on record, either for students or parents. And so a key implementation challenge or step in these kinds of interventions is gathering student cell phone information or parent cell phone information, where you're also going to be messaging parents. And so what we're doing, so for example, in some sites where we're working now, what we're doing is presenting to students that these text messages are an opportunity for them, that they'll be starting at a certain point in time. We introduce the campaign to them and collect both their consent for messaging and their cell phone number at that time. And then typically in designing the messages that go out, the first message that goes out will remind students who's reaching out to them and why. And really teeing that up for students is important. We saw in some of the messages that came in just the question of who's this? Why are you texting me? So making sure students know that communication is coming and why they're getting it, that it's not a scam or somebody trying to sell them something. In that first message that goes out, we also would typically say to a student, hey, if you don't want these messages, just reply stop. And again, in the SignalVine platform and in other providers with whom we've worked, they can build in an automated function to the system where if the student does write back stop, they're automatically canceled out of receiving subsequent messages. So there are really two points in the process where consent should be obtained, first that active consent when the cell phone number is collected, and then giving students or parents the opportunity to opt out from future messaging if they decide that it's no longer beneficial.
Just at a very quick point, because I imagine there are some people on the call who are maybe thinking about texting but hesitant about whether students would find it, be receptive to it, or maybe find it annoying. We do lots of texting work with lots of different organizations at this point, and I think across the board we find that when offered, the substantial majority of students request texting. When we text them, the substantial majority respond, and very few of them opt out. Just to kind of illustrate the extreme of that in a positive sense, I'm doing a texting project on loan borrowing now with a large community college, and we just embedded a cell phone collection field as part of the loan application. 90+% of students provided their cell phone numbers, and in the messages that have gone out so far, 100% of students have written back, just saying thank you or with questions. Now, again, that may be on the extreme, but I think it illustrates the potential interest that students have in communicating through this kind of channel.
Wow, that's tremendous. So I've got a couple more questions that are coming in and are my own as well, and maybe these are related. So the first question is particularly relevant to your first slide showing the impact of where the students ended up going in persistence, entrance persistence in that second year. What were the sort of enrollment patterns in terms of sector of schools, so community college, 4-year, even proprietary to some degree? Were there big differences between students depending on the type of institution that they attended?
So the one thing that I'll say, I don't have that top of mind for those particular intervention impacts, but one thing that I will say, in some of the earlier descriptive work that we did, really thinking back to the map slide that Ben talked through on the variation in summer melt rates that we observed around the country, one key point of variation in the extent of summer melt that we have observed is whether students were intending to go to a 2-year institution or a 4-year institution. So in the Boston area in particular, when we observed when we investigated variation in summer melt, we found that rates were about twice as high among those students who reported intentions to go on to a 2-year institution. Now that could be related to a variety of different factors. So one, typically, or on average, students who are continuing on to a community college are less well prepared for post-secondary education. So there could be an academic readiness component related to that. And then a second component that it might relate to is that for students who plan to go on to a 4-year institution, they've had to engage in a number of processes much earlier in their senior year of high school, if we're focused just on traditionally aged college students. So, you know, typically the application process happens much earlier in the senior year, whereas for students who are thinking about the community college, their time frame is much more fluid. But as I said, we do observe particularly different rates of summer melt for those who are intending on 2-year institutions and those who are intending on 4-year institutions. Now, one other thing that I want to relate that to is the campaign that we implemented to improve post-secondary persistence. For many reasons, we would hypothesize that students who are intending on 2-year institutions may find particular benefit in this kind of intervention. They may be more likely to be going to school part-time. They may spend less time on campus. And if some of the modes of communication to students once they're enrolled are happening through posters that are put up on campus or other traditional means of communication, students who are enrolled in 2-year institutions in particular may not have the opportunity to see those posters, may not be reacting to those other modes of communication. And so at least in our FAFSA renewal intervention, we found that the text messaging was particularly beneficial for that segment of students.
Perfect. Thank you. And can you give us an estimate of the per person cost of these sorts of things?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the questions, right, is not should we do anything to improve access and success, but how do we invest limited dollars that we have, right, given that over the last couple of decades there's been lots of efforts and promising research about how we can reduce disparities in who gets to go to and succeed in college. And one of the benchmarks we like to point to is that there's been decades of research on the effect of offering students additional financial aid, and that usually finds that $1,000 of additional grant aid increases enrollment and persistence by somewhere in the range of 3 to 6 percentage points. So that provides some benchmark we can compare to. It's never going to be apples to apples because we're not evaluating offering students summer melt or additional grant aid. But to give you that as a benchmark, we showed earlier that providing just 2 to 3 hours of help of counseling outreach during the summer month increases sophomore year persistence by about 8 percentage points. That's at a cost of $100 to $200 per student. Our peer mentor work, again, enrollment increases 4 to 5 percentage points at a cost of about $80 per student. The summer melt texting work we've done to increase enrollment in various sites by 4 to 7 percentage points. That's at about $7 per student. That includes the cost of paying counselors to work over the summer if students need help. Our freshman year texting work comes in at about $5 per student. And so that we could do a more thorough and full cost accounting that takes into consideration in-kind contributions that districts or colleges are making. But even so, that might take the texting costs from $7 to $20 per student. I think however you slice it, especially given the ways in which we can automate and scale some of these interventions, we view this as a compelling, cost-effective option that educational organizations or agencies can choose to improve college outcomes.
That is great. Thank you very much for that, Ben. We're going to have our final question as folks begin to sign off for their 2 o'clocks. But just so we get this wrapped up, what kind of data support or underpinning is necessary? Obviously, I think tracking individual students is probably something you have to be able to do to make this work. Is that correct, or is there a different kind of approach you can take?
So in terms of understanding outcomes for students, you know, one thing that made understanding summer melt possible is the relatively recent phenomenon that school districts are, and other organizations are linking up information on students' post-secondary intentions to students' actual post-secondary outcomes, typically through the National Student Clearinghouse. So in order to track outcomes, having access to data or obtaining data from the National Student Clearinghouse on students is a key step. In order to implement this kind of summer melt outreach, I think that the key, you know, whether text messaging or not, the really key pieces of information are, one, who your students are. So do you have a mechanism to identify those students who are planning to continue on to college? So typically organizations have done that through things like high school exit surveys. In the case of UAspire, they have sometimes done that through students who are applying for additional scholarships that UAspire offers. For the text message type interventions, additional sources of information that are necessary, obviously students' name, their cell phone number, and then when you do have information on where students are planning to continue on to college, you can really customize the information that you provide to students to make sure that they're getting institution-specific information. So with the text messaging, it's possible to send students very general messages, but the more information you have, the more customized you can make things and personalized you can make the information to the student's particular needs and circumstances.
Excellent. All right. Well, on behalf of the roughly 100 people who were on this, and I know many, many more who are waiting for the link at home, I want to thank Ben and Lindsay for sharing their time and expertise with us this afternoon. I think this was a really wonderful, wonderful number one process that you use to tell us a great deal of information without overwhelming us with detail, and particularly thank you for showing us these amazing results that you studied. So we will continue to maybe pursue this issue via continued conversations. We do encourage everybody on the line that if you would like more information, you are more than welcome to give me a call. This is Haley, and I can connect you or facilitate some Q&A with Ben and Lindsay and get back to you. But I do think the interest we've seen in this does dictate that we'll have some programming on it in the future for all communities that are participating in the partnership. So I want to thank everybody, Ben, Lindsay in particular, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and great holiday season.
Thank you, Haley. Thanks everyone
so
for joining.
Thank you.
All right. Take good care.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.